Imagine living your entire life in a city that officially does not exist. It appears on no maps. There are no road signs pointing to it. And if you ask the government, the ground it stands on is nothing but an empty forest. Welcome to the ZATOs, the Soviet Union's ultra-secret closed cities. During the Cold War, hundreds of thousands of people were locked away inside these heavily guarded perimeters. They were given better food, higher salaries, and luxury apartments. But this luxury came with a devastating unspoken price. Because inside these invisible borders, the military was conducting the most dangerous experiments known to mankind. And when things went catastrophically wrong, the residents became trapped test subjects. Welcome back to Unknown Signal. Today we are opening the classified files of the Soviet Union's darkest legacy. From an apocalyptic nuclear explosion that was successfully hidden from the world, to a biological nightmare that silently slaughtered an entire town. Our story begins in Chelyabinsk 40, also known as City 40. Built deep within the Ural Mountains by Gulag prisoners, it was the birthplace of the Soviet nuclear weapons program. Residents here believed they were the privileged elite of the nation. But environmental safety was completely ignored. For years, the Mayak plutonium plant simply dumped thousands of tons of high-level radioactive waste directly into the nearby Techa River, poisoning the only drinking water source for dozens of surrounding villages. When the river became too toxic, they began storing the boiling radioactive sludge in underground steel tanks. But on September 29, 1957, the cooling system in one of these massive tanks completely failed, and nobody bothered to fix it. At 4:22 p.m., the dried radioactive waste detonated with the force of 70 tons of TNT. A 160-ton concrete slab was blown into the sky, launching a massive glowing orange cloud of deadly radiation directly into the atmosphere. This was the Kyshtym disaster, the third worst nuclear catastrophe in human history. It heavily contaminated an area of 20,000 square kilometers. Yet, the Soviet government said absolutely nothing. The outside world wouldn't discover the truth for nearly 20 years. Instead of a proper evacuation, the KGB merely ordered the locals to slaughter their livestock and bury their crops. Thousands of people unknowingly absorbed lethal doses of radiation, but getting radiated to death was a slow, invisible process. For the ultimate horror, we must travel just 200 kilometers north to another closed city, Sverdlovsk 19. What happened here in the spring of 1979 didn't kill people over the course of decades. It killed them in a matter of hours. On April 2nd, an unnatural, horrific epidemic swept through the southern district of the city. Victims would suddenly develop a high fever, followed by catastrophic internal bleeding. Within 4 days, their lungs would completely fill with fluid, suffocating them from the inside. The local death toll skyrocketed. Men, women, and children were dropping dead so fast that the military had to take over the hospitals. Entire neighborhoods were quarantined by armed soldiers, and the bodies were quickly bathed in highly toxic chemicals before burial. The Soviet government released an official, urgent explanation. The deaths were simply the result of an outbreak of intestinal anthrax. The citizens, they claimed, had purchased and consumed a bad batch of black market, contaminated meat from local farmers. To the average citizen, this explanation seemed plausible. But when independent investigators finally managed to smuggle the autopsy reports out of the country years later, they noticed a chilling anomaly that completely destroyed the government's entire story. The autopsies revealed zero evidence of intestinal damage. The victims hadn't eaten the anthrax. They had breathed it in. By tracking the exact locations of the victims, researchers realized they all lived in a perfectly straight line, directly downwind from a military facility. The autopsies confirmed the horrifying reality. The victims had completely destroyed lungs. They hadn't consumed tainted meat. They had inhaled a weaponized biological agent. Epidemiologists mapped the deaths and realized every single victim lived in a straight, narrow line downwind from military compound 90. The devastating cause of this massacre was finally revealed decades later by a defector. It wasn't a sophisticated enemy attack. A tired maintenance worker had simply forgotten to replace a single critical exhaust filter in the facility's active anthrax production plant. Because of that one missing filter, a highly lethal plume of anthrax spores was quietly released into the night sky. Experts chillingly noted that if the wind had been blowing toward the city center, hundreds of thousands of people would have died. To hide their catastrophic mistake, the KGB swiftly confiscated all hospital records and forced doctors into silence. The true horror of the Soviet closed cities wasn't just the deadly experiments, but the government's absolute willingness to sacrifice its own citizens to maintain absolute secrecy. The Sverdlovsk incident proves that the deadliest threats are often entirely invisible. But what happens when the weapon isn't biological, but a psychological radio frequency? Click the video on your screen right now to uncover the dark truth of the Russian woodpecker. I am Unknown Signal,